I'm sure it comes as no surprise that I was a youth very much attracted to the occult and supernatural. I was drawn to the esoteric from childhood, researching on the internet in the days when a home connection tied up the phone line and involved America Online. I bought my first book on witchcraft at a store during high school, hiding it in my backpack like I was smuggling contraband, and purchased my first tarot deck the same year, a deck I still own today. That being said, my grandmother was careful to caution me against the dangers of the Ouija board. The Ouija board is a game from the 19th century, a tool to contact the spirit world. It is nothing more than a board with the letters of the alphabet, numbers 0 through 9, the words yes and no, and the word goodbye. Ouija boards are considered anathema to the Catholic Church, as are all forms of divination, and its prominence in the novel and film The Exorcist did nothing to help this position. My family is not Catholic, yet my grandmother cautioned me because of an experience she claimed to have in her own youth. My grandmother married young and had children, so she didn't get to explore the 60s to the degree of many of her peers, but she was interested in the esoteric, even as I would be decades later. She owned a Ouija board. One day, she went to put it away on the shelf in the garage. To her disbelief, the game burst into flames before her eyes. She ran into the house to fetch a fire extinguisher, but when she returned, there were no flames, and the game was completely intact. She got rid of the Ouija board and never touched one again. Or so she told me. While I cannot prove this incident ever actually occurred, it is an example of the aura that has grown up around the once innocent game. The Ouija board would likely never have been designed, much less gained popularity, had it not been for Catherine and Margaret Fox. These two young women, under the guidance of their much older sister Leah, explored the odd creaking and groaning that happened in their home and ultimately came in contact with the spirit world, or so they claimed, and so it seemed to onlookers. This began the spiritualist movement in New York State in 1847, with Leah managing her sister's mediumistic talents and arranging shows for the credulous onlookers. The movement quickly gained headway, with more and more mediums rising up, not only in the United States, but Europe as well. Of course, nearly 40 years later, Maggie Fox Kane had a much different tale to tell the New York Herald, with the subheadline reading, "A celebrated medium says the spirits never return." The two younger Fox sisters explained to the world how they feigned all their readings, and that they had never contacted a single spirit, yet were credited with founding spiritualism. Supposedly, they were goaded onward by their older sister's guidance, and she certainly never turned against the spiritualist movement that had gained them so much fame. The Fox sisters are a fascinating study for another time. For now, we will focus on the dawning of the Western world's interest in reaching into the world hereafter, and trying to contact the spirits who have already passed to the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, as Shakespeare terms it. Even after the Fox sisters recanted their involvement, though they later insisted that they had lied about that, and that they were real mediums, the attention of the masses were piqued. They wanted to know about the afterlife. They wanted to be able to speak to loved ones who had passed. The Ouija board was a prime example catering to this desire. Patented in 1891 by Elijah J. Bond, the Ouija board had a very simple design, and little is changed in it beyond materials 125 years later. According to the original patent, the objects of the invention are to produce a toy or game by which two or more persons can amuse themselves by asking questions of any kind and having them answered by the device used and operated by the touch of the hand, so that the answers are designated by letters on a board. Bond had to prove his toy could work to get his patent, and the board managed to spell out the name of the patent officer. Now, the patent doesn't offer an explanation for what makes the game work, nor does it make mention of ghosts, spirits, nor anything else that belongs to the realm of the esoteric. According to Ouija historian Robert Murch, this ambiguity was a deliberate part of the game's marketing. Given the long history of the game, I would call it a successful gamble. There are two famous incidents involving the Ouija board I'd like to touch on, one fictional and one as ambiguous as the science behind the game. The latter is the story of Mrs. Pearl Curran, a St. Louis housewife who channeled the spirit of 17th century Englishwoman Patience Worth, and even wrote a number of books under the spirit's influence, or so Mrs. Curran claimed. In 1916, Curran began using the Ouija board as a means to take down Worth's poems and stories, though she later channeled the spirit without any such medium. While some scholars claim that Curran did not have the education necessary to write the works she published, Other scholars argue that the writings were what an uneducated early 20th century woman thought a 17th century spirit would sound like. Worth's details of her own background were extremely vague, with birthplace, place and style of death, etc. impossible to verify. Plus, the name of the spirit was taken from a popular novel, To Have and to Hold by Mary Johnston, though Curran claimed she hadn't read it at the time she first channeled the spirit. Of note is the fact that the Currans never made any money off the Curran-Worth novels, and, according to John Curran, lost $4,000, about $51,000 in 2010 dollars, from Patience Worth magazine, according to Diliberto. So, if it was a scam, it was one only for fame. While Mrs. Curran had early ambitions of being a singer, it seems unlikely she would not seek monetary compensation as well as celebrity. The second iconic image of the Ouija board is found in the novelization and film The Exorcist. While I cannot find an official start date for the Catholic Church's banning of the Ouija board, it is safe to say it was very early in its popularity. The Ouija board is a form of divination, which is anathema to the Catholic religion. As to the idea that it is a form of contacting the devil, again I was unable to find a beginning date for that. But I cannot help but imagine the publication of The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty didn't help. In it, the child Regan became demonically possessed, and part of the explanation for this is her using a Ouija board by herself. She is in contact with a spirit, and it is strongly implied that this spirit is a demon and responsible for the situation. The film, of course, features the visual horror described in the novel, from vomit like pea soup to the child's head spinning all the way around, and a variety of other manifestations of the demon. But since the source of all of this evil begins when Regan was playing with the Ouija board, particularly by herself, it seems to point a neon finger at the Ouija board as a source of evil and source of potential demonic possession. This seems a lot to lay on something patented as a toy or novelty, doesn't it? Let's take a break from the religion to look at the science, for there is an actual psychological explanation for why a Ouija board might work, rather than just random chance and trying to make sense out of nonsense, or the old classic of your friend secretly moving the planchette without your knowledge. There are two known and proven types of actions as we understand them today, conscious and unconscious actions. Conscious actions are, for example, my typing this script, or, in a few days, my speaking this script into the microphone. They are what we have control over and know we are doing. Unconscious actions are those things that happen whether we think about them or not, or even things we have no control over. There were originally two types, axiomotor, things like your heartbeat or breathing, and sensory motor, which is mostly reflex actions. I'm not going to dive further into it than that because I'm not a doctor, and we're after something else. A psychologist named William B. Carpenter put forth an idea in 1852, which may be an explanation for paranormal experiences. This is a third type of unconscious action called ideomotor action. These are unconscious, involuntary motor movements that are performed by a person because of prior expectations, suggestions, or preconceptions, according to Jackson. In other words, these are things you don't realize you know. The Ouija board is tapping into your unconscious mind and bringing those answers up to your conscious mind with the game as a tool, translating those bits of data into something you can understand. Interestingly, this can tie into some New Age ideas of the Akashic Records, the idea of every man having access to these memories of mankind as a whole, and so the Ouija board is not, in fact, contacting a ghost, but merely looking up information in the Akashic Records. But if I try to turn this video into one on the Akashic Records, Akasha, by the way, is best translated in this case as ether, we will be here a very long time. Suffice to say, the Akashic Records supposedly hold all of the memories of man going back to the beginning of man, though some beliefs state that they only go back to the memories of the oldest person currently living. Anyway, let us consider the case of the Ouija board spelling out the name of the patent officer. Elijah J. Bond and his sister-in-law Helen Peters, reputedly a strong medium, were the ones who, as I understand it, spelt out the name via the planchette. Perhaps while they were waiting, one of them, without really paying attention, heard the man's name mentioned, and it was sent to their unconscious memory. Or perhaps they passed the man on the street some weeks before while he was being greeted by someone, and again it was relegated to the unconscious mind. Perhaps it was entered into the Akashic records, and that was where the unconscious mind turned. Or perhaps his name was John, and it was a lucky guess. My research has not turned up what the name was, but this was 1891, and there was less of a variety of names in common use than there are today, where I encounter names that make me question the sanity of new parents everywhere. All of that being said, what is my opinion of the Ouija board? I believe, as with all things in the realm of the occult and esoteric, that intentions are everything. If one brings out a Ouija board, or a deck of tarot cards, or a crystal ball, with the desire to do harm and contact an inimical spirit to bring about said harm, it is just as likely to occur with a deck of playing cards as anything else. Those tools are merely that, tools. It is in the hands of the practitioner that it will find its purpose. Take caution, keep your intentions pure, and I believe you will come to no harm. Now, this has been a rather simplistic view of the Ouija board, and it is one that I intend to develop further later on. But for now, I consider this an introductory video on the subject, and I would be interested in hearing your own personal experiences with the Ouija board, if any, and answering questions from any viewers I might have. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you like, share, subscribe, all of that fun YouTube nonsense. I look forward to talking to you at a later time.